Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast. Delighted today to be joined by a friend and somebody who's influenced a lot about what I think about in this market, in this field. He's pure, in a good way, entertainment, but by what he does and how he does it. Michael Bungay Stanier wrote The Coaching Habit. Again, had a profound impact on how I coach, profound impact on how we look at coaching within Potential Squared. He's also, just in terms of the way he thinks about his work and his writing and MBS works, is a real inspiration. So you're going to get a story. You're going to get a sense of Michael today, the humor, the background, and that experimentation that he's got around how he operates. Really good conversation. So hopefully you enjoy it.
Here's me leaping from the interesting parts of my life. Because when most people tell the story about who they're from, they're like, let me tell you all my little successes and show you all my medals. And it's a bit boring, actually, for most people. Yeah. Born in Canberra, Australia's national capital, and very large suburb. So quiet place to grow up, but lovely place to grow up. Bounced through high school and had fun there. Went to my local university, ANU, Australian National University, where I did such things as appear in the Law Review, the on-stage show, in something called Synchronized Nude Male Modeling.
Lovely.
We're all grateful that YouTube didn't exist back then, because that would have been traumatizing for people at the time, but also me now seeing that. I finished law. I did a literature degree, which I liked, reading books. But I also did a law degree out of anxiety, because I'm like, you can't get a job with an English degree. So I finished law school being sued by one of my law school professors for defamation, which put the kibosh. I mean, I'd done a summer job in a law firm, and I was like terrible at it. Also, it's like, I could just see how soul destroying it was. I mean, it's like literally you track your time every 6 minutes, and I'm like, that's literally dehumanizing me as we speak. So
it takes me 6 minutes to get a thought out, let alone
exactly. So being sued by that professor was a kind of kibosh on any hopes I had of pursuing a law degree. I also won a scholarship that got me to England, where at Oxford my only real achievement was meeting my wife. Literally 30 years plus 1 day from today. Our first date was on the 20th of November, and we're recording this on the 21st. And this is what was happening this morning, 30 years ago. This is so cool. We'd had a really great first date the night before. We'd gone to this kind of college dinner, and then we went out dancing till 3 a.m. It was amazing. But this morning, 30 years ago, I was playing Australian rules, Aussie rules, Oxford versus Cambridge. And I said to Marcella, come along. So she came along with her friend Marnie. And it was pouring with rain. It was cold. It was dark. It was miserable. Because, of course, it was England. And England's pretty much always like that.
And now it's exactly the same.
Yeah, exactly. So 30 years on, the weather hasn't changed a bit. So very slippery. Aussie rules is like 18 men on both sides running around a slippery little ball trying to get it. And there's a little scrabbling around in the mud. Anyway, 5 minutes into this, having been in one of those melees, I looked down at my hand, and my arm was covered in blood, and I'd split my hand open. And so I was like, and so I wandered off the field, and it looked like as I looked at my hand, I could see all the way down inside my arm into my elbow. There was a lot of blood. There was a lot of internal flesh I could see. I know, exactly. So anyway, my son was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the hospital. So we hailed a cab. I was in my Lothario mode, so even though I was in shock, covered in mud, rain matted hair, I was like, hey, I had a lovely time last night, darling. She's like, I don't know what I'm doing here. At a certain point, we said to the taxi driver, hey, look, we've only got £5 cash to our name. So he was like, well, this is as far as your money takes you. So we had to walk the last 2 miles to the hospital. After which I got my hand stitched up. And then Marcella took me back to her place. I slept in her bed. She went and slept in somebody else's bedroom for that first date. And it was the start of a beautiful relationship. So
that is amazing.
Anyway,
30 odd years.
30 days to the day today that Aussie rules game happened.
That is amazing.
And anyway, I finished a master's degree at Oxford in literature, stumbled into the world of innovation and creativity, and spent a bunch of years trying to invent stuff. I made a serious contribution to what has been called on whiskey.com the world's worst single malt whiskey ever invented. So I helped invent that.
Be More Wrong is the book title that I've got in my mind.
I moved into the world of consulting and change management because I had been really curious as to why all the ideas we invented in the world of new product development never went anywhere. We never really launched anything. That took me from London to Boston to Toronto. We moved to Toronto. My wife and I moved to Toronto. We had flights out of on 9/11, so 21 years ago. And it meant that the job I had lined up in Toronto fell apart, which was the catalyst for me then starting my own business. So BoxOfCrayons was born after a certain amount of time faffing about doing anything I could to earn money because, I had a broad range of skills and no knowledge of how to run a business. We found our vibe, which is around practical coaching skills, which then got a big boost 6 or 7 years ago when I wrote a book called The Coaching Habit, which has had a ton of success. And so now Box of Crayons is run by Shannon Minifee, a far more competent CEO than I ever was or ever will be. And I run a different company called MBS.works, which is more about giving people the confidence to back themselves and build stronger working relationships and do work that matters.
Amazing. And I can vouch for Shannon is much better than you and me and everybody else who's a CEO. She's just amazing. And tell a story about where you met her, because I always love that.
So I live in Toronto, Canada, in a place called near Hyde Park, the big like Central Park in London or Hyde Park, Central Park in New York or Hyde Park in London. And the main street up there is called Roncesvalles. My wife and I favorite restaurant was on Roncesvalles called Tofina Pizza. And we were sitting at the bar eating pizza, and Shannon was behind the bar. And we got talking to her, and she was doing a PhD in literature. Now, my wife has a PhD in literature. I have a master's degree in literature. So we're like, book person. So we kind of geeked out about books for a bit. Yeah. And in the end, I hired her to come and do a little bit of help marketing The Coaching Habit. So hired her 6 or 7 years ago. Honestly, one of the best things I've done was to recognize her capacity. And, 3 years ago, she took on being the CEO of Box of Crayons and just has that sort of, she has two things that make her brilliant as a CEO. One is she's got that ability to kind of do pattern thinking, so big picture thinking, making connections, seeing the landscape, seeing into the future a little bit. And secondly, she is very good at just putting her finger on the soft spots and pushing on them and just going, this needs to be better. This isn't right yet. Turns out I have none of those capacities. I was a CEO getting by on kind of chutzpah and kind of bravado and, the patriarchy because I'm a tall, white, old dude. So I'm like, that worked in my favor. But now we have somebody who knows what she's actually doing.
Yeah, and I'm not tall, but I had the rest of it, and I'm still trying to get by it. But I have Sharon, who's my equivalent.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to know. It's good to know when to get out of your own way and do something different.
Yeah.
I want to dig into the coaching habit because it's had a profound impact on me, my coaching, but it's had a profound impact on a number of people. But for those who don't know this, because I'm still coming across people who are doing what I would call teaching coaching the old school way, and you do it very differently. I'd love you to explain what's different about it.
I wrote The Coaching Habit to try and unweird coaching, really for people who are regular people, managers or leaders or individual contributors in the work setting, rather than people who are professional coaches, although it has a fan base amongst that as well. Coaching often gets kind of created in this slightly black box, mysterious, woo-woo, it's like some sort of ancient art that you're kind of like, how do you do this? And so it's got this kind of, at its worst, it's this combination of, I'm just going to tell you what to do, and I'm going to kind of do a whole bunch of weird touchy-feely stuff that, I like touchy-feely stuff, but sometimes that combination is not particularly terrific. For me, and through the coaching habit, we just kind of went, here's the goal we're looking for. This is the behavior that is at the heart of coaching. Can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? And most of us are not that good at staying curious a little bit longer through habit, because we've been rewarded for years for having answers, and through a desire to help and a desire to stay in control and a desire to be the smart person in the room and add value. We tend to rush to advice giving. There's a place for advice, just a little later than you think. And if you can stay curious a little bit longer, the type of relationship you have and the type of conversations you have changes. I mean, in the book, it's like, here are 7 good questions that you can use that cover a lot of circumstances. And if you just use these more often, you're going to make good progress. But at the heart of it is the insight. Stay curious a little bit longer.
And for somebody, because the next book was The Advice Trap, and then How to Begin came after that. And what I've loved about, from our conversations at ISA organization where we sat and we talked books, but you've always been curious, but you've always been willing to deconstruct some things in terms of your own life, and just even the Box of Crayons story, and get more curious about life in general. Tell me how you keep that curiosity going, because I think it's a lesson for others.
I'm not sure I have a great answer for that, Colin. It's in part I'm probably slightly. First of all, I'm slightly wired that way. Like I'm nosy, and also I'm. One of the things that I'm good at, and this is part wiring, part practice, is trying to find simplicity on the other side of complexity.
Nice.
So I get great pleasure out of working something and kind of going, here's a simple way of teaching this or a simple way of explaining this. And that's something I'm good at. If I had to name the kind of the thing that I'm good at a few things, but the thing I'm really good at that's probably hardest to replicate is this ability to, what Shannon, the CEO, would say is to thingify stuff. Give it form, give it structure, give it names. In the business world, it's useful because that actually creates IP, intellectual property, that becomes tools and valuableness to the organization. But it's also just helpful in a teaching way to give people kind of handles so that they can grasp stuff and climb up the wall. I'm looking at my little office here. I'm surrounded by books, unread books, and I think it's a joy of reading, and a joy of creating and making as well. Like before we hit record, you and I were talking about book writing because we're both authors, and we're like, it's kind of hard and it's a bit miserable. And I just was showing some statistics that said 86% of books don't break even. They sell less than 5,000 copies. It's really hard to make a success out of writing a book. But for me, writing a book is a great way to find a new way about talking about stuff, find a new way about sharing a tool that might be helpful for people.
I'm reading Marshall Goldsmith's, Earn Life book. I just find it, and he's been part of a big influence in your life as well in terms of the top 50 coaches and other pieces, because he's a classic curiosity person in a lot of ways.
He is. He's an interesting dude. He created this thing called the 100 Coaches. Originally, it was the 15 coaches. And I got asked to apply by a mutual friend. And I was like, I don't want to apply for that. I mean, like, I'm trying to be my own man. I don't want to be I don't want to be a Marshall Goldsmith person. I want to be a Michael Bungay Stanier person. So I didn't apply. Marshall and I were both speaking at a conference in Toronto, so I arranged to have breakfast with them. So I said, isn't it breakfast? And Marshall, in a classic Marshall move, goes, I love you. I think of you as an adopted son. I'm like, I've never met him before. I'm like, this is all happening quite quickly. And he's like, and you're definitely one of the 15. I'm like, oh man, I haven't even applied for one of the 15. Anyway, I got selected as one of the 15, which is great. But then that idea has evolved and changed. There's like a bigger group of us now. But Marshall he's very interesting in terms of like thinking about legacy. I mean, what I love about his Marshall Goldsmith 100 is his idea is, I will teach you everything I know for free. Your job is to also do something like that passes legacy on, to pass his teaching on. Yeah, I admire him for that.
Yeah, and a legacy is an interesting one because I've always had debates over time, and How to Begin why is a book about how to to pick. I love the depressing time clock at the beginning of it around, like, you've only got 5 big projects and you're going to die.
Yeah.
But I think this concept of legacy is in a lot of us. And The Second Mountain that you got me onto, again, a really good book in terms of prompting. So talk to people a bit about that, because I think there's a lot of people probably sitting out there going, well, I'd love to do what these guys do.
Yeah.
But actually, how do you do it?
I hold legacy in a kind of paradox, which is, I assume in 100 years' time, nobody will have heard of me, nobody will know me, nobody will remember me. My impact in the world will have just blown away. And I'm totally fine with that. Like, I love the Shelley poem Ozymandias, how you pronounce that, when it's like, look upon my legacy, ye mighty, and weep, and the lone sands of the desert stretch to the horizon. I mean, civilizations rise and fall. And I'm no civilization, but it's like, I'm not going to be remembered in 100 years' time.
Yeah.
And I find that not depressing. I find that really freeing, because I'm like, so go for it. It doesn't matter. It's like,
get that video back out from my early youth.
Yeah, exactly. So in part, I think about legacy as, what's the best thing I can do that is the best expression of myself and kind of helps pull me forward into the next best version of me, but also what contributes to the world to make the world a better place. It's a numbers game. And if you can think about, how do you make your best contribution to the world in a way that serves you, is thrilling for you, but is important and serves the world, then everybody wins. I think there are these moments where we come to crossroads. When you finish university, I think you're at a crossroad, or finish school, where you're like, okay, what am I doing? Am I going to be part of capitalism? Am I going to be not part of capitalism? Am I going to work for myself? So there's all of that. Then there's the classic 35-year-old so-called midlife crisis moment where you're like, okay, I've done 10 years of adulting. Where the hell am I? And how did I end up here?
I don't think I've done 10 years. I think I've a lot less than that.
And then there's the place where you and I mean, Colin, you're very close to being an empty nester. When you hit the kind of 50s and 60s, if you have kids, your kids are gone. So you're like, now what? That was a key focus, and they're no longer a key focus. For many people, they're like, I'm at a certain peak in my career, and that's coming to an end. I can feel that arc is coming to an end, and I have another good 15 to 20 years left. What am I doing with that? And that's when you can either go, well, I'm just going to go find a way of playing golf on the regular, which is fine, but I'm not sure that gives a whole lot to the world. Or you're like, okay, so what's my next thing? How do I find something? And in the How to Begin book, I say, find a worthy goal, something thrilling and important and daunting, which brings 3 things into tension. This, what lights you up? Secondly, what gives more to the world than it takes? And thirdly, what takes you to your own learning edge so that you can kind of continue to crack yourself open and grow.
And that learning edge is a critical one. And it's something that I think your other superpower, I mean, simplicity out of complexity is one, but I think the other is the learning edge. When I sit around you, and we sat next to some of the people like Ken Blanchard, other people in that room. Yeah. But there's something about that learning edge that you take people to with fun, humor. Yeah. Yeah, but just an important bit. Yeah?
I think it's part of my style, which is like a degree of, I do like to push people with a degree of, say, ribbing, or as we would say in the UK, piss taking, because that's like part of the fun for me.
So where is your learning edge now? Because you've done the How to Begin. You've just got a new book that you sent to that horrible place called the editor.
The copy editor, yeah, exactly.
Copy editor,
yeah, that comes out in June next year, which might be interesting for people just to hear. Like, we're doing this in November. Yeah. This book, I'm slightly behind on my timetable for this, and it's not coming out for another 7 months. But because these things just take time to get out into the world. In the How to Begin book, I talk about these 3 different lenses a great work project can have. It can have a project, it can be about people, or it can be about patterns. So project is how most people would name or articulate their worthy goal, which is like, here's the thing I'm trying to do. Might be starting a business, writing a book, beginning a charity, beginning a PhD. Who knows? It's like, but it's doing a thing. It could have a focus around people. In other words, how do you change the nature of your relationship. Like for you, Colin, and I'm just making this up, but knowing that you're about to be an empty nester, a worthy goal for you may be going, how does my wife and I redefine our relationship now that parenting isn't a key part of, day-to-day parenting isn't a key part of what we do? We need to redefine this to go, how do we reset our relationship for whatever's next? That could be a worthy goal.
Yeah.
And then the third focus, which is the most kind of staring in the mirror focus, is patterns, by which I mean your own patterns, your own language and your own labels and the way you show up in the world. What I am trying to do, this is my learning edge, is to think of myself as a writer, to become a writer. Not think of myself as a writer, to become a writer. Which will sound odd to some people because, you and I have just been talking about all the books I've written, and I have written, I think, 7 or 8 books now. But mostly I write those on the edge of all the other stuff that I do. I'm like doing this, I'm doing that, I'm giving speeches, I'm trying to run businesses, and I'm trying to support Shannon, the CEO. There's just a lot of other things that I do. And when I think about what a writer does, they structure their world a bit differently than the way I structure my world. At least I think that's the case. The learning edge for me is, how do I construct a way of living that puts writing at the heart of what I do? Author is a technical term, meaning you have written books. Writer is a identity term, meaning you make this the most central part of who you are. That's kind of the learning edge for me, because I'm finding it quite hard to let go of a whole bunch of things about how I currently work. My to-do list is the bane of my life, but it also turns out to be a bit of a comfort blanket for me, which is like, look how many things I have on my to-do list. Yeah. And a writer would not have a whole big to-do list. A writer would have pretty much one thing on the to-do list, which is read some books and then write some stuff. Yeah. And then start drinking heavily in the early afternoon. So 3 things. I haven't got to that. Channel my Hemingway, yeah,
Hemingway. I was just about to say. So it's classic here, because there's so many people out there who will say, one of the things is have your side hustle. Yeah, people are starting to think. So have your side hustle. It's in the tech industry, side hustle. So therefore, it can be your big thing in the future. Yeah. But people never get to it because there's so much other things that are happening in our lives. Thinking about the patterns, how have you distilled down what you want to be and what you're good at? Because there's a difference between what you want to do and what you're good at.
I have ideas for another 3 or 4 books, like really kind of tangible ideas about what they could be. And those ideas have stuck around long enough for me to go, there's probably something actually here. Because I have lots of ideas all the time, and most of them are terrible. But these ones, I'm like, you know what? There's something here that irritates me enough that I want to write about it, because I think I can do a better job at teaching it or explaining it or whatever it might be. I have a sense of what I'm good at, which is writing books. Yeah. Or teaching in general, and writing books is one of the most powerful ways I can get my teaching out into the world. I probably haven't quite wrestled hard enough with what am I saying no to, and that's kind of what I'm trying to work on now. I'm having another crack at having an executive assistant who will run stuff for me. So now I have to say no to controlling all the little miscellaneous stuff I currently control in my life and hand it over to Claudine, and how will she do that and what will that look like? I'm right in the heart of kind of wrestling with that. It's like much easier to teach it and tell other people to do it than actually do it yourself. That's so it goes.
Yeah, but I think there's a transparency to you, which I love, because you're willing to say when it's difficult, and you're willing to say that this is what I hold on to. And I think there's something in there, because there is something about getting to the point of writing book, whatever. And it goes back to a conversation we had a while ago, which is the difference between practice leadership and thought leadership.
Right.
I'd love for you to articulate, because you gave me a pattern in my head which was all about practice leadership, to get you to thought leadership.
I don't remember that. Tell me that conversation.
Because we were sat in a thought leadership session, and up on the screen was, you need to be published in Harvard. HBR. You need to go through all of this. And we're both sitting. Well, I was sitting here and I was looking at your face, and I think you were thinking the same thing, going, "Nah, never happened. Never happened. I'm not going to do that."
Yeah.
So therefore, I walked away from that session, from our conversation, going, "Yeah, I'm a practice leader."
Yeah.
And I've always been happy with that. But I sense that's a bit of an excuse to go, so I can still do all the other stuff that I'm doing in the side.
Well, it's such an interesting conversation. Thought leader, I don't know where that term came from particularly.
Yeah.
It feels like LinkedIn feels at the moment, which is like everybody in LinkedIn is trying to claim thought leadership space.
Yep.
So there's just a lot of shouty McShouty going on in LinkedIn with a bunch of people using kind of well-tried tropes around how to make people read their stuff. So clickbait headlines and this and that. And most of the stuff that gets posted there, I would call, well, my acronym is to call it TRUE, taboo, TABO, true and bleedingly obvious. I'm like,
I'm just going into my post now just to check. Yep.
I'm like, it's like, here's a piece of recycled knowledge that I've read in 8 books before, and I'm like, why am I reading this?
Yeah.
Now that publishing is democratized, there's a lot of noise to go, I'm trying to rise above the thing. I'm trying to be useful. I'm trying to build my reputation as a thought leader. This isn't a criticism of those people, really, because that's what we're all trying to go, how do I have the impact that I want to have? What does it mean to be a leader? And sometimes it's like, I have a friend who's a coach, and I was like, don't write a book. You don't want to write a book. You don't like writing books. You've been talking about it for 10 years, and it's just it's not actually something that you're excited by. But then she has to find her own way of going, what is the best expression of who I am and the work that I've got in the world?
Yeah, it's interesting.
That's not a great answer. I mean, that's more a ramble than an actual answer to something.
Well, it's a good ramble because it's got me thinking, and I think that's part of it. Is that if I look at it, one of the strengths when you looked at posting and you look at is the ability to repost other people's material, that you think is good, that's prompting your thinking. So it goes back to your books and your office stacked up next to you. It's how do we use all of these patterns that we have around us to articulate things that are helpful. And your 10 minutes or less of coaching was a massive help for people.
I'm known for my successes, like the coaching habit and how to teach, how you can coach in 10 minutes or less. And let me show you how. I just had a whole bunch of stuff that I put out into the world that has been greeted by crickets. It hasn't even spectacularly failed. It's just sunk in a grey haze of mediocrity and indifference. There's also this idea that it's a bit of a numbers game. I mean, same with my books. I've written 7 books. One of them has sold 1.5 million copies. The others haven't, and are unlikely to. And so I'm like, okay, so how do I try and boost my ego and try and boost sales of the books that are out there? How do I still want to write a book if only 10,000 people read it? And 10,000 people is still a lot of book sales.
Yep.
Is that still the best use of my time and place? And I'm like, it might be, because for me, having the coaching habit as this kind of perpetual bestseller now means that the other books I write get pulled into its gravity. So if you read the coaching habit, you might then find one of my other books. So that's partly why I'm doubling down on being a writer and being an author. Is how do I put fuel on the fire that's actually working?
In any profession, there's tough bits to get through, but actually crystallizing it down to say, so what do I want to be? A writer goes back to James Clear's identity, and then it goes into the habits, and then clearing all the clutter of the bad habits away from you. And it goes down to sort of... Yeah, it is hard. But it goes down to sense of inner peace, really, in some ways. Yeah. And I look at you and I see when you're posting, when you're in Australia with family and other places, there seems to be a sense with your best friend post the other day. There's something that I see you centered, so much more centered now in what you're doing. And I wonder if that's got something to do with it because you're clearing the clutter.
I think it's also probably just as that work around what makes me happy. How do I serve the world best? What game am I playing and what am I trying to win? And
Nice.
there's a way that when you just get older, you're like some of these, the way I talk about it perhaps is this. There's this style of way of being in the world, which is being an elder. And when you become an elder, you're less about trying to win your own battles, and you're more around, I'm now in service to other people. When I left being CEO at BoxOfCrayons 3 years ago, I started trying to read up about being an elder. Anybody who's listening to me, you already go, but Michael, you sound so young. And if you're watching any of the video clips, you're like, Michael, you look amazingly young. You only look like you're 28. And I'm like, I know. But
and
I'm actually 54.
He's looking so young.
Like, for instance, I've just been talking to a guy called Chip Conley who runs something called the Modern Elder Academy. And I'm going to teach, I think, next year at the Modern Elder Academy. And I'm excited about that. Claiming this identity as being a young elder is part of where maybe the sense of kind of contentment comes from.
Yeah, I love it.
And also having the good luck of having a big win with the coaching habit gives me a degree of freedom.
And there's, I think the process that you told me about going through to write that book, there's a hard work that's gone into being successful on that. So yeah.
Yeah, I was under contract with a regular publisher company in New York to write that book, and I spent 5 years and 6 versions of the book trying to get them to publish it, and they wouldn't. They didn't like it. So in the end, I went, okay, I'm going to self-publish it.
Yeah,
that worked out well.
Yeah.
I keep being pulled into going, should I just email them and gloat that I've now hit 1.5 million copies? And I'm like, no, be the bigger person, Michael. Come on, you can do this.
You can do this.
Yeah.
I love it. We could talk for hours, but thank you for sharing the stories, because I think this is what Leadership Tales is about. It is about the stories, the Shannon story, the book story, the identity of the writer story. I think all of this is crystallizing for people out there a version of a pathway that they can take. And I've loved following what you do. I love the work you do. So, but if you had to answer one question, which is, and I probably know the answer to this, if you had to pick one biggest screw up in your life that's been your biggest teacher, what would it be? It's such a. I'd be curious to know what you think my answer is, because I'm not sure what my answer is. I've got a whole range of screw ups. Some of them are more spectacular than others, like being sued by my law professor that was a big thing. The being the consultant and leaving that job because I kind of had spent 3 years struggling and failing at that job. There's been a series of things that have crystallized a sense of who I am. And years ago, I think Ray Bradbury said, "Look, you got to take you got to treat bad reviews exactly the same as good reviews, which is to ignore all of them. Like none of them are personal, and all of them are useful." Yeah. So I'm not sure what I think about failure so little, and I think it's wiring, but practice as well, which is like, okay, that was another screw up. I rarely do anything where the risk is catastrophic. I'm good at understanding what's at risk, and I'm good at, I think, mostly going so little is at risk. Because what is at risk is time or money or reputation. Yeah. And time, I've made the choice to do the thing. So that, whether it succeeds or not, I've made that choice. Money, I always know roughly how much money is at risk, and I'm not going to risk, my life savings, whatever many that. I'm not going to risk that $45 of my life savings, so I'm going to be fine with that. And then in terms of my reputation, I'm like, I don't have nobody cares. Nobody cares about me and my reputation. This is a terrible answer to a good question, which is, I don't think that much about... It's probably a terrible question with a good answer. I think it's the other way around.
What? I mean, you said you thought you knew what the answer was going to be. What did you think I was going to say?
So I thought, think you've lived your life as a series of small experiments, which is the ideal way to do it. Yeah. And I think the only one that's, in a lot of ways, that you and I talked a lot about was being an entrepreneur, a CEO. But actually, that's turned out brilliantly in terms of Shannon and bringing her in and the other people that are coming into your life. So I would have said that, the entrepreneur side. Yeah. Versus that. So, me ending up as a CEO of a company with 15 or 20 people and all sorts of stuff, I was just not very good at that. I mean, really, we got through by having product that sold,
and the fact that I've got a certain amount of self-deprecating charm. But really, it wasn't a well-run company. It wasn't a well-structured company. But I don't really think of that as a failure. I just think of it as kind of clarity that, okay, I figured this out, that I'm not good. Yeah. And I'm like, so how do I make this a little bit better? And, hiring Shannon turned out to be that.
Brilliant. Sure, it's always a delight and a pleasure. If people want to find you, where would they find you? At the moment.
If you have a vast amount of corporate training money and you don't want to spend it with Colin, then BoxOfCrayons.com is the website for that information about how we help big companies. But if you're more about the individual growth and individual kind of learning and kind of cracking out your own best self, then mbs.works is the website.
Yeah, totally recommend it. It's brilliant. Follow you and follow the work. And thank you to coming on. Thank you to Shannon for giving you the space to come on.
That's right, exactly.
Michael, thank you. And look forward to catching up soon.
Yeah, thanks, Colin.
So that was Michael Bungay Stanier, MBS. MBS Works, if you want to go seek some more information about his work there. I'm not going to point you to Box of Crayons because of that, whether you want to spend it with us or them. No, seriously. We partnered with Michael and Box of Crayons in one of particularly of our clients, and we still use his knowledge and his thinking around how we approach things. He's brilliant. Love his humor, love spending time with him. And I don't think I've ever met anybody who's not given the feedback that just getting some insight and wisdom from how he thinks really helps. So simplicity out of complexity is a great way of saying it. But for me, also experimentation in my language has been a hallmark of what he's done in there. So hopefully the host didn't get in the way of the great story from Michael Bungay Stanier. And I'll look forward to welcoming you on another episode of the Leadership Tales podcast very shortly.